Parents, what is the craziest thing my child has ever said? My 4-year-old daughter looked up at me at breakfast one morning and said, "Mommy, I remember when I was the man who lived in our house before us, and I want to tell you about the 11 months during which she described in increasing detail a life she could not possibly have known about." My daughter is named Eden. Eden was 4 when this had started. Eden is now 5. The thing about my house was specific. My husband and I had bought our house about 2 years before Eden had been born. The house had been a small ranch in a quiet neighborhood. The house had been built in the 1960s. The house had been owned by an older man before us. The older man had passed away in the house about a year before we had bought it. The death had been a natural death. The man had been in his 80s. The man had been a widower. We had been told all of this when we had bought the house. I had not been telling Eden any of this. I had been keeping the information private. Eden said, "Mommy, I remember when I was the man who lived here before us." I said, "Honey, what do you mean?" Eden said, "I had a wife. Her name was Edith. She made the best apple pies. And then she got sick and I was alone for a long time." I had been processing. Eden had been 4. Eden had been not the kind of 4-year-old who had been making things up randomly. I said, "Honey, where did you hear about Edith?" Eden said, "I just remember." The thing kept happening over the next 11 months. Eden had been telling me specific things about a man named Walter. Eden had been describing where Walter had kept his tools. Eden had been describing the exact location of a small cabinet that had been hidden behind the wall in the basement. The cabinet had been a thing my husband and I had not known about. We had checked. The cabinet had been there. The cabinet had contained a small box of letters from Edith. Eden had also been describing the day Walter had died. Eden had been telling me that Walter had been sitting in a specific chair in the living room. Eden had been telling me that Walter had been listening to a specific song. Eden had been telling me that Walter had been holding Edith's wedding ring. I had been doing research. I had researched the previous owners. The man who had owned the house had been named Walter. Walter had been married to a woman named Edith. Edith had died about 10 years before Walter had died. I had then found Walter's obituary. The obituary had mentioned that Edith had been famous in their small social circle for her apple pies. The obituary had mentioned that Walter had been a carpenter. The obituary had not included the specific details Eden had been telling me. I had then contacted Walter's adult daughter who had been listed in the obituary. The daughter was named Cordelia. Cordelia and I had a long phone conversation. I had told Cordelia what Eden had been saying. Cordelia had been quiet for a long time. Cordelia said, "The song my dad was listening to when he died was Edith's favorite. The chair was Edith's old chair. The ring was the one she had been wearing when she had died." I had been processing the fact that Eden had been telling me things she could not possibly have known. I decided I could not carry this alone anymore. One night after Eden had fallen asleep, I sat Corey down at the kitchen table. I had the box of letters. I had Walter's obituary. I had the notes from my call with Cordelia. I told him about the breakfast when Eden first said it. I told him about the cabinet behind the wall in the basement and how Eden had told me exactly where it was before we even knew it existed. I showed him the letters from Edith. I showed him my notes from the call with Cordelia. Corey listened to all of it. He sat there with his hands on the table and he did not look at me. Then Corey said something I did not expect. He looked up at me and said, "I think you need to stop. I think you are reading into things a 4-year-old said, and you have built a whole investigation around it, and that worries me more than anything Eden said." I felt like the air left my lungs. I pushed back. I said, "The cabinet was behind the wall, Corey. We did not know it was there. She told us exactly where it was." Corey shook his head slowly. He said, "Kids explore. She could have found it. She could have overheard something. There are explanations that do not require what you are suggesting." But I looked at his face and I saw something I had not expected. He was scared. He did not want this to be real. He wanted there to be a normal explanation because the other option was something he did not know how to hold. I felt the distance open between us like a crack in the floor. The one person I thought would understand was sitting across from me looking at me like I was the one who needed help. I did not argue further. I put the letters back in the box. I said, "Okay," but I did not stop. The next day while Corey was at work, I called Cordelia again. Before I could even explain why I was calling, Cordelia said, "I am so glad you called. I have not been able to stop thinking about what you told me." I told her my husband did not believe it. Cordelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to come see the house. I want to meet Eden." I hesitated. I knew Corey would not approve of this, but I needed to know. I said yes. We set a date. Saturday morning came. I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my hands. Cordelia was standing on the porch. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back and kind eyes. Cordelia walked through the front door. Then she stepped into the living room. Eden looked up from her blocks. Eden had never met this woman. Eden had never seen a photo of her. I had never described Cordelia to Eden. Eden looked at Cordelia for a few seconds. Then Eden stood up and walked over to her. Eden looked up at Cordelia's face and said, "You look like your mom." Cordelia's whole face changed. It was like watching something break and come together at the same time. She put her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Cordelia whispered, "Everyone used to say that." I stood there watching the two of them, and I felt something settle inside me. I did not have all the answers, but in that moment I knew that whatever Eden had been telling me for 11 months was not nothing. Cordelia and I sat down on the couch. She watched Eden play for a minute, then she leaned forward and said, "Eden, can I ask you something?" Eden glanced over and said, "Okay." Cordelia said, "Do you remember the man who lived here?" Eden nodded. She said, "Yeah, he was old. He was nice." Cordelia said, "Do you remember anything about him and his wife?" Eden put another block on her tower. She said, "Your dad missed your mom a lot. He talked to her picture every night before bed." Cordelia closed her eyes. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me. She said, "He kept her photo on the nightstand. I found it there when he passed." Eden kept talking. She said, "There was a big tree by the fence and he used to sit under it after dinner." I felt something cold move through me. We had redone the backyard the summer after we moved in. There had been no tree there. There had been no sign of a tree. Cordelia's face went still. She said, "We took that tree down after a storm in the 90s. He was heartbroken about it." We had been sitting there for maybe an hour when I heard the front door open. My whole body went tight. I knew that sound. He was home early. Corey appeared in the doorway. He stopped. He looked at Cordelia sitting on the couch with tears on her face. He looked at Eden on the floor. He looked at me. He did not say anything in front of Cordelia. He just tilted his head toward the kitchen. I followed him into the kitchen. He turned around to face me. He said, "Who is that woman? What is happening right now?" I said, "That is Walter's daughter." Eden recognized her. I did not tell Eden who she was. Corey stared at the floor for a long time. When he looked up again, his eyes were wide. He said, "I do not want this in our house. I do not want our daughter being pulled into something I cannot explain. I want this to stop. I said, I cannot make her stop remembering Corey. I have tried. She just knows things. He looked at me for a long time and then he walked out of the kitchen. He went upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close. I went back to the living room. Cordelia said she should go. I walked her to the door and she hugged me. She said, thank you for letting me come. I said, thank you for believing me. A few days later, my phone rang while I was making dinner. It was Evelyn, Corey's mother. Evelyn did not do small talk. She said, Corey told me what has been going on with Eden. I am concerned about what you are exposing her to. Corey had told his mother. He had not told me he was going to do that. I said, Evelyn, I appreciate you calling, but Eden is fine. This is something Corey and I are handling. Evelyn said, it does not sound like it is being handled. It sounds like it is being encouraged. I said I needed to go and I ended the call. Evelyn started calling regularly after that. The first calls were soft. Then the tone shifted. She said, I talked to a friend who is a child psychologist. She said children who fixate on past life narratives sometimes have underlying anxiety. I said, Evelyn, Eden is fine. She does not have nightmares. She does not cry about Walter. When she mentions him casually. There is no fear in it. Evelyn was quiet. Then she said, that is exactly what worries me. A 5-year-old should not be this comfortable talking about death. I told Evelyn I needed to go. The next call came 4 days later. This one was a plan. She said, I made some calls. There is a specialist who could see Eden next week. I can drive you both. I said, Evelyn, I did not ask you to do that. Eden does not need to see a specialist. About a week later, I was folding laundry and my phone buzzed with a notification from the calendar app that Corey and I shared. There was a new appointment on Thursday. The title said Eden, and the location was a children's clinic. I had not made that appointment. I called Corey. I said, you scheduled an appointment for our daughter behind my back? Corey was quiet. Then he said, I did not schedule it. My mom did, but I think it is a good idea. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I said, Eden does not need to be fixed. She is not broken. Corey sighed. He said, no one is saying she is broken. I said, that is exactly what you are saying. Then he said something and his voice was different, smaller. He said, I do not know what is happening in this house and that scares me. I want someone to tell me my daughter is okay. I heard the fear, and it made me soften, but I could not let Evelyn turn my daughter into a problem to be diagnosed. I said, she is okay. I have been with her through every single one of these moments. She is not suffering. She is remembering. I am her mother, and I am telling you she is okay. Corey did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, I need to get back to work. I canceled the appointment that afternoon. 3 days later, Evelyn called again. There was no softness in her voice. She said, I am planning to come to the house this weekend. I think we need to sit down and talk about this as a family. I knew exactly what Evelyn's visit would be. It would not be a conversation. It would be an intervention, unless I was not alone. I went into my bedroom and I closed the door. I pulled up Cordelia's number. My hands were shaking a little. I said, Evelyn, my mother-in-law is coming to the house this weekend. She thinks I have been irresponsible. She thinks Eden needs to see a doctor. I need you to come back to the house. Cordelia did not hesitate. She said, I will be there. Evelyn arrived on Sunday afternoon. She looked like she had prepared for a business meeting. She walked through the front door carrying a folder. She set the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were printed articles about something called childhood confabulation. Next to the articles was a small white card with the name of a specialist. She said, I am here because I love Eden. I am here because I think we need to have an honest conversation about what is best for her. I let her talk. She went through her case step by step. Children are impressionable. I could have said Walter's name around Eden without realizing it. Eden could have found the cabinet in the basement while playing. Corey was sitting next to me and he was nodding along. When Evelyn finished, she looked at me and waited. I took a breath. I said, I did not tell Eden about Walter. I did not tell her about Edith. I verified every single thing she said independently. And then I called Walter's daughter and she confirmed the rest. Evelyn said, and where is this daughter? How do you know she is not just telling you what you want to hear? The doorbell rang. I got up from the table. I walked to the front door and opened it. Cordelia was standing on the porch. She was holding a small box against her chest. Cordelia walked into the kitchen. She looked at Evelyn. She set the box on the table. She said, I brought photos. I brought letters. I brought my father's things. I can answer any question you have. Then Eden wandered into the kitchen from the living room. She saw Cordelia and smiled. She saw the box on the table and walked over to it. She pointed at it and said, that is the box your mom kept her recipes in. The room went completely still. Cordelia opened the box slowly. On top were photos and old letters. But underneath all of that was a small stack of handwritten recipe cards, held together with a rubber band. Cordelia lifted them out. Her hands were shaking so bad I could see the cards moving. She held them up and said, these were my mother's recipe cards. I put them in this box after she died. I have never shown these to anyone. Nobody spoke. I looked at Evelyn. The polish was gone. Her chin started to shake and her eyes filled with tears, and she said very quietly, almost like she was talking to herself, my mother died when I was 14. I never got to say goodbye. The kitchen was so still I could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Evelyn was not fighting anymore. She was sitting at my kitchen table crying about something she had been carrying for decades. Cordelia reached across the table and put her hand on top of Evelyn's hand. Cordelia said, neither did I. She was sick for a long time and then she was gone. My dad spent 10 years in this house alone because he could not let go of her. Evelyn nodded. She just sat there with Cordelia's hand on hers. Corey looked at me. He looked at the recipe cards sitting on the table. He said quietly, I am sorry. I should have listened to you. I reached over and took his hand. I said, you were scared. I understand. Evelyn did not bring up the specialist again. She called me a few days later. She did not apologize directly. She said, I have been thinking about your house, about Walter. I think Eden is lucky to have a mother who listens to her. It was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. I took it. Cordelia visited one more time a few weeks later. She brought Eden a small framed photo of Walter and Edith on their wedding day. Eden held the photo and studied it for a long moment. She said, he loved her so much. Then she put the photo down and asked for a snack. She was 5. She was already moving on. Eden mentioned Walter less and less as the months passed. By the time she turned 6, she did not mention him at all. I asked her once if she remembered the man who lived in the house before us. Eden tilted her head and said, what man? I keep the letters from the hidden cabinet in a drawer in my bedroom. I keep Cordelia's number in my phone. I do not try to explain what happened. Some things do not need explanations. Some things just need someone willing to listen.